The Galactic Council chamber was deathly silent. A dozen alien species, some with glistening exoskeletons, others with bioluminescent skin, stared at the screen before them. The holographic display flickered, replaying the impossible event. Over and over again, a fleet, a human fleet, one that should not exist, one that had been erased from history, condemned to drift in the void centuries ago. And yet, against all logic, it had just annihilated an entire armada belonging to the Zithar Dominion, one of the most powerful war factions in the known galaxy. Admiral Vorthak of the Zithar clenched his mandibles, his claws digging into the stone table. His forces had outnumbered the so-called Cursed Fleet 10-1. His warships, equipped with plasma lances and gravity disruptors, were state-of-the-art. And yet every single one of them was now dust, torn apart by ships that were supposed to be derelicts. The footage zoomed in, replaying the moment of destruction. The cursed fleet had emerged from the void, their ancient hulls covered in jagged scars, their energy signatures warped and unstable. But their weapons, gods, their weapons, had burned through Zithar defenses like they were paper. The Council murmured in confusion. The cursed fleet was a myth, a ghost story whispered among mercenaries and traders. It was said that centuries ago, an entire human battle group had been lost to the dark fringes of space, consumed by an anomaly. No distress signals, no wreckage, nothing. And yet, here they were, rising from the void like vengeful wraiths. The humans were not supposed to be capable of this. One of the council members, a serpent-like Yilnari, hissed. They should have perished. Long ago, another alien, covered in crystalline armor, muttered in disbelief. Admiral Vorthak slammed his claw against the table. I want answers now. Where did they come from? How did they do this? His mandibles clicked in frustration as his eyes burned with fury. Then the transmission shifted. A final message from the cursed fleet had been intercepted. The static-filled screen cleared for a brief moment, revealing the face of a human, his skin pale, his eyes sunken yet burning with an unnatural light. He spoke, his voice calm, chilling. You should have left us in the dark. Then the screen cut to black. A heavy silence hung over the chamber. For the first time in galactic history, the Council realized something terrifying. The humans had returned, and they were no longer the same. The shock of the cursed fleet's return rippled across the galaxy. Every major power scrambled to understand how a human fleet, one that had vanished into the abyss centuries ago, had re-emerged with terrifying force. But while the Galactic Council debated in their polished halls, the true story unfolded in the cold, unfeeling void of space. The cursed fleet had not simply been lost. It had been transformed. Centuries ago, the fleet, originally known as the Terran Vanguard, had been part of a last-ditch effort to defend humanity's borders against an overwhelming enemy. Cut off from reinforcements, they had fled into a region of uncharted space known as the Nyx Expanse, a dead zone, devoid of stars, where sensors failed and time itself seemed to unravel. No ship that entered had ever returned. It should have been the end of them, but against all odds, against all logic, the fleet had survived. Something in the darkness had changed them. No one knew what they had encountered in the void, what horrors they had endured, or what forbidden technology they had fused with to persist against time. Their ships, once sleek and advanced by human standards, now bore the scars of the impossible. Blackened hulls pulsing with strange energy, weapons that defied known physics, and a presence that made even the most battle-hardened aliens recoil. Yet, one thing remained unchanged. They were still human, and now, after centuries in exile, they had returned, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as something far more terrifying. Admiral Vorthak stood aboard his new command vessel, the Vortex. Fang! His eyes locked on the latest reports. The Zithar Dominion had been on a path to galactic dominance for decades. A warrior race bred for conquest, the Zethar had long viewed humans as a minor species, unworthy of concern. Their fleets had crushed dozens of civilizations, worlds had burned under their plasma bombardments, and yet, in mere hours, a force that should not exist had turned them into prey. Their armada, the mighty fangs of dominance, had been annihilated near the Perseus Veil. Their weapons had proven useless, their warships shattered like brittle glass. Vorthak seethed at the memory of that last transmission. "You should have left us in the dark. A threat? A warning, or something far worse?" His claws tightened. It didn't matter. The Zethar were not cowards. If the humans thought they could strike from the shadows and disappear, they were mistaken. "Ready the fleet," Vorthak growled. "We will hunt these ghosts to the edge of the void itself." The Zethar would do what they had always done, crush the enemy beneath their might, or so they believed. Unbeknownst to the Zethar, they were not the only ones watching. From the depths of the galactic core, the Zelari observers, an ancient and secretive race, monitored the conflict with growing unease. For eons, the Zelari had watched civilizations rise and fall. They had seen empires burn, wars consume entire sectors, and species vanish into extinction. But never had they witnessed anything like this. The humans were unique among the younger races, known for their defiance of fate, their relentless adaptability. But this cursed fleet was something altogether different. The lead Zelari, observer, a being of translucent blue flesh and ever-shifting limbs, whispered to its kin, "They have returned from a place no one should return from. They are no longer bound by the laws we understand. If the Zethar challenge them, they will not win." Another observer spoke, its voice like distant chimes. "The humans have always defied expectations, but this time we do not know what they have become." Silence fell over the gathering. The war had only just begun, but one thing was already certain. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were here for something else. The Zethar Dominion did not hesitate. Within days of the cursed fleet's attack, Admiral Vorthak had rallied a new armada, twice the size of the one that had been annihilated. Over 1,000 warships, each a masterpiece of destruction, burned through hyperspace, hunting the ghosts that had defied them. They would find the cursed fleet, crush it, and wipe the stain of their humiliation from the stars. And yet, despite their superior numbers, their advanced tracking systems, and the full might of Zethar technology, the humans remained elusive. No matter how fast they moved, no matter how far their scans reached, they found only cold, empty space. Then, the disappearances began. At first, it was a single scout ship, vanishing without a trace. Then a patrol squadron lost contact mid-transmission. Hours later, an entire battle group was simply gone. There were no distress calls, no wreckage, no evidence of battle. It was as if the void itself was swallowing them whole. Vorthak sat in the command chamber of the Vortex Fang, his mandibles grinding together in frustration. His officers stood in tense silence, afraid to speak, afraid to question what was happening. "Find them," he growled. "Now!" The bridge crew scrambled, scanning deep space vectors, recalibrating sensors, anything to locate the enemy. But every readout told the same story. There was nothing there. Then, without warning, the ship's lights flickered. A garbled transmission crackled through the speakers, an eerie distortion filled with static and whispering voices, then a single voice, clear and cold. "You're in our waters now." The transmission cut out, the lights returned. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Vorthak shot to his feet. "Trace that signal!" One of his officers hesitated, eyes wide in disbelief. "Sir, it came from inside our fleet. A chill ran through the warlord's spine. That was impossible. No ship had penetrated their defenses, and yet something was already among them." The next attack came without warning. At the edge of the fleet, A Zethar dreadnought, the Wartide, suddenly lost all power. The bridge crew scrambled to restart systems, but before they could react, the ship's own guns turned inward. With surgical precision, it fired upon its own escorts, vaporizing 3 warships before the rest of the fleet could even comprehend what was happening. Then, as quickly as it had started, the Wartide exploded from within, its remains drifting lifelessly into the abyss. Panic spread through the fleet. Some whispered of human saboteurs. Others feared something even worse, that the cursed fleet had become more than human, that they had unlocked something unnatural in the void. Vorthak did not believe in ghosts, but as more ships fell, he realized the truth. This was not war. It was a hunt. Aboard the flagship of the cursed fleet, the Oblivion's Wake, Admiral Elias Caney watched the destruction unfold through the glassy, fractured interface of his command console. His fleet did not operate like any other. They did not charge into battle with brute force. They did not fight fair. They had learned that in the dark. For centuries, they had adapted to an enemy unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. When they were first lost in the Nyx expanse, they had faced something other. A force that did not obey the known laws of physics or war. A force that shattered reality itself. Most of them had not survived. But those who did, they had become something else, something the galaxy was not ready for. Now, Caney's fleet did not move in straight lines. They did not obey the predictable patterns of war. They slipped through the cracks of time and space, striking from nowhere, vanishing before retaliation could come. And the Zethar were beginning to understand that. They had assumed they were the hunters. They were wrong. The Zethar fleet had been reduced by nearly a third before Vorthak realized the true nature of the battle. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about numbers. It was about control. The cursed fleet was everywhere and nowhere at once. They infiltrated systems, hijacked ship controls, manipulated enemy formations until entire battle groups fired upon one another. Every engagement ended the same way, without a single trace of human wreckage, only the scattered debris of Zethar ships floating in the dark. Then the humans made their move. The Oblivion's Wake materialized at the heart of the Zethar fleet, emerging from a distortion in space so violent it tore smaller ships apart in an instant. Aboard the Vortex Fang, Vorthak's claws curled as he stared at the impossible sight before him. A ship that should not exist, a fleet that should have. Died centuries ago, and yet Caney's voice echoed through the comms, clear and calm. "Your war is over, Admiral." Vorthak bared his fangs. "You will not defeat us with tricks and whispers." The human commander gave a small, knowing smile. "You still don't understand, do you? We don't need to defeat you. We already have." All at once, the Zethar fleet systems failed. Engines shut down, weapons powered off, a silence unlike any before it fell over the battlefield. The Zethar had lost control of their own fleet. They had already lost the moment the cursed fleet decided. Admiral Vorthak's mandibles twitched in disbelief. His fleet, his entire fleet, was dead in the water. The ships remained intact, yet they were lifeless, their mighty weapons useless, their engines silent. His claws gripped the edges of his command chair, his eyes darting across the failing status screens. The Vortex Fang, his pride and glory, the deadliest warship in the Dominion, was now nothing more than a floating tomb. Across the battlefield, the cursed fleet moved like specters in the dark, their ships weaving between the frozen Zethar warships with eerie precision. They did not fire, they did not attack, they simply waited. Then the comms flickered to life, a single transmission coming from the Oblivion's Wake. Admiral Elias Caney's voice was calm, controlled, and utterly devoid of malice. "You thought this was war. You thought we were here to fight." Vorthak bared his fangs. "And yet you do nothing. You leave us here like prey. Are you cowards?" A soft chuckle crackled through the speakers. "Cowards? No. We simply learned a lesson you never did." Kaney's image flickered onto the bridge's central display, his face pale and lined with something beyond age, something Vorthak did not understand. We spent centuries in a place where war means nothing, where destruction is an illusion, where survival is not about who fires the first shot, but who controls the board. The display zoomed out, revealing the entire Zethar fleet from a strategic viewpoint, and then Vorthak saw it. The ships had been rearranged. He hadn't even noticed it in the chaos. The fleet's formation was no longer a battle-ready phalanx. It was a pattern. The realization hit him like a plasma blast. "You used us," Kaney nodded. "You were never the enemy, Admiral. You were just the tool, and now the war ends, not with a battle, but with a lesson." The screens on the Vortex Fang flickered again. Coordinates appeared, strange ancient symbols, ones even the Zethar did not recognize, and then space itself rippled, a soundless shockwave pulsed outward. Behind the cursed fleet, reality twisted and tore. A rift, massive, dark, hungry, opened at the center of the battlefield. It pulsed with unnatural energy, a deep abyss that devoured light, stretching into a place that should not exist. Vorthak's mind reeled. His warriors scrambled in fear. No one had ever seen anything like it. Kane's voice remained steady. "This is what we found in the Nyx expanse. This is what changed us. We are not here for revenge. We are not here to conquer. We are here to make sure no one else makes the mistake we did." The rift pulsed again, and the cursed fleet began to move. One by one, their ships drifted toward the rift. They did not resist. They did not turn back. They were returning to whatever nightmare had created them. But as the final ships approached the event horizon, Kaney's voice returned one last time. "You should have left us in the dark." Then the rift collapsed. The shockwave knocked the Vortex Fang backward, its dead systems sparking to life. Across the battlefield, Zethar warships flickered as their controls returned. The cursed fleet was gone. The war was over. Silence. Admiral Vorthak sat frozen, his claws trembling. His warriors dared not speak. The Zethar had never known fear, but now they did. They had faced annihilation, but not in the way they expected. They had not been crushed by superior weapons. They had not been outgunned, outmatched, or outfought. They had been outmaneuvered on a scale beyond comprehension. Kaney's fleet had never intended to win. They had used the Zethar armada to re-enter the abyss, to go back to whatever had made them, and the terrifying part. They had gone willingly. Vorthak finally exhaled, his claws digging into his armrests. The Zethar dominion had been humbled. The Galactic Council would soon hear of this. The other great empires would whisper of it, but none of them would understand. Because the truth was far worse than anyone dared to admit. The cursed fleet was gone, but that meant one day they might return. Admiral Vorthak stood alone in his chambers aboard the Vortex Fang, staring at the vast emptiness where the cursed fleet had vanished. The rift was gone. The humans were gone. And yet the fear remained. Reports from across the fleet confirmed the same thing. No casualties, no physical damage beyond the initial skirmishes. The cursed fleet had every opportunity to obliterate them, but they hadn't. They had chosen to leave. But why? For the first time in his long and bloody career, Vorthak did not know what to tell his warriors. They had always believed in conquest, in dominance, in the simple truth that strength dictated survival. And yet the humans had played a different game entirely. Not war, not survival. Control. The Zethar fleet had been turned into pieces on a board. They never even knew existed. The thought burned in his mind. They had never been the enemy. They had simply been used. Days later, the transmission reached the Galactic Council. Every major power in the known galaxy watched the classified footage in silence. The war had been erased before it had even begun. The cursed fleet, a legend, a ghost story, had proven to be real, and their power was something beyond understanding. Some council members argued for retaliation. Find them, hunt them down. But the wiser among them knew the truth. There is no war to fight, a Zalari observer finally said, its bioluminescent tendrils pulsing in grim realization. They were never here for us. They were here for something else. And what if they return? Another voice asked, quiet, fearful. The Zalari's glow dimmed. Then we pray they are still human. On a distant human outpost, a hidden archive deep within the Sol system, an encrypted message blinked onto the screen of a high-ranking intelligence officer, the final log of Admiral Elias Kane. The officer hesitated before playing it. Kane's voice was calm but distant, as if speaking from somewhere beyond. We have returned to where we belong. The rift was never a prison. It was a door. Do not follow us. Do not search for us. We are not what we were. A pause, then softer. But if the dark ever comes for you, pray that we still remember what it means to be human. The message ended. The officer swallowed, staring at the screen. His hands trembled as he reached for the encryption controls. Then, with a deep breath, he deleted the file. Some things were better left forgotten. In the far reaches of space, beyond the borders of any known empire, something stirred in the darkness. A ripple, a whisper, a shadow deeper than the void itself. The cursed fleet was gone, but the galaxy would never forget, because in the places where light does not reach, where time does not move as it should, something is waiting, and one day it will return. End.